Hello and welcome to the Unsung Sport Podcast, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the sports you love. Today I'm joined by Nick Stubbings, GP and club doctor for Colchester United. Nick, thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure to be here. Never done a podcast, so it's an experience, but see how it goes.
Hopefully a good one.
Yeah, never.
Great stuff. Well, before we get into your role, can you tell me a bit about your background? I know that you have done, we was talking before, a hell of a lot of studying and know so much, so it'd be great to hear a bit more.
Absolutely. So I originally started as a pharmacist started in Kent. Worked as a pharmacist there for a bit and did some charity work with the Better Lives Foundation out in Sierra Leone. And while I was out there, decided that I didn't feel like pharmacy was what I was going to spend the rest of my life doing. Went off to medical school in Leicester. Then moved up to Dundee and did my foundation training there. And whilst I was there, I did a teaching job as well, University of St Andrews. And then we being my wife and I, moved down to Nottingham for a couple of years, then to Bury St Edmunds, and then to Colchester most recently. So I originally got into sort of sport medicine, I suppose, when I was up in Dundee. And I did a bit of pitch side work with Scotland Rugby League and then with our Broth Football Club, who were looking for a doctor. Wow. And then we moved down to Nottingham and I was looking around for sports clubs and I found Sheffield Eagles. They were very kind and gave me the role of their club doctor for a couple of seasons. I did a little bit with Mansfield Town, like covered a couple of games for them. Yeah. And then when we moved down to Bury St Edmunds, I took up a job with London City Lionesses. So I worked in women's football for a season as their club doctor, and then we moved to Colchester and I moved over to the men's team there. So it's been a journey across the country, but it's been pretty fun.
Brilliant. I'm just, for everybody down south, I'm going to say Sheffield Eagles are a rugby team, just for those that...
Rugby League.
Rugby League, there you
go. So it's very different.
Fair enough. It's interesting, actually, you mentioned the women's football there, and obviously you see a lot of play and a lot of injuries. Do the women roll around on the floor when they get minor touches as much as the men?
Not at all. They're the London City Lionesses were troopers, and you know if one of them went down and stayed down, you knew that something was wrong. So so you were sort of straight on for that.
Not quite as tactical in the time wasting then.
No, I mean, no, not really. Actually, there's no other way of saying it. I think a lot of that has changed this season with the new rules that are in. Yeah. And especially with the time being added on, I think that's stopping a lot of the time wasting that's happening. But I think with the women's game, it was very much you go down, you get up pretty quickly and carry on unless you really can't.
It's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because when you look at the new rules, which actually I thought is a great idea, but then you do hear players saying the load is too much now. From a medical point of view, is the load too much for players with this extra time?
So I think we're actually starting to see, and there's some good studies coming out. I think they're currently in progress through this season, and we'll see the results of those at the end of the season. But the preliminary data is that, yes, there is a bigger or like a higher load, and we are starting to see more overuse injuries coming out and more load related injuries. Things like plantar fasciitis, so irritation around the bottom of the foot, and strains, muscle tears, ligament injuries. So we're starting to see a lot more of that, and we're only at not even halfway through the season yet, and you're starting to see more of that. So I think there is an increase in load, and I think that's something that it's going to need to be incorporated into the training as we move forward if that rule remains in place.
Yeah. Do you think it will, or do you think it should, or does that really depend on what the studies show?
I don't know if it depends on what the studies show or depend on what the FA decide. I think yes, like potentially it will remain. And I think that as it stands at the moment, they are cracking down on a lot of, like, the officials are cracking down on a lot of things like time wasting, dissent from players as well. And I think that is a good thing because ultimately it means that the flow of the game continues. So yes, I mean, I think that is good. I don't know what will happen with the load related injuries, or whether or not we'll just need to adjust the way that the training takes place.
Yeah. Okay, and that's interesting. I assume, obviously, if there is going to be more injuries because of the additional minutes over the course of a season, which will be considerable, I guess, that's going to suit the bigger clubs as well, or the clubs with the bigger squads and that strength and depth.
Yeah, and bigger squads. Yeah, strength and depth, like you say. Being able to rotate players through a little bit more. Will obviously be the benefit of the clubs with the bigger budgets. I think that when we'll really start to see the effects of it will probably be later on into the season when you do have those clubs with the bigger budgets or bigger squad numbers that are able to sort of rotate a little bit more, fresher legs.
Yeah.
I think that's what we'll start to see.
Excellent. And I know we talked about this before you came on air, but I think you've been doing kind of like 20 years additional studying, which just blows my mind. It really does. But of all the things you've covered, why sports science or sports medicine?
I actually fell into it by accident. It was very much my wife that told me to stop being stupid and to do sports medicine. So originally I was a renal pharmacist, a kidney pharmacist, and when I went into medicine, I thought that's the route I was going to go down. I'd become a renal doctor or something medical within a hospital. And I was sitting there during my first year of foundation training, so that's the year that you do after you've finished university. And I was sitting there at the computer thinking, I'm bored. Like I've done this job so far, and I just need like a course to do to keep me active and keep me interested. And so I was looking online, and I found Scotland Rugby Union were offering a sports medicine course, like a sports trauma. Right. So we have to do to cover pitchside medicine. You have to do a sports trauma course. And we'd probably know it down here as ATMIF, but up there it's called Scrum Cap. So the Scottish Rugby Union medical, cardiac, and pitchside skills. It's a bit of a stretch, yeah. But they that was one of the courses that they had on offer, and I thought, I'll apply for that. Like that seems decent. So I did that. It was a really good course, really well run, really nice group of people. Like they all wanted to help you, and I was very junior at that point in my medical career, and so they were all really nice about it. And then through that, Scotland Rugby League then got in touch, and my wife had done the same course, and we ended up covering some Scotland Rugby League games together, like the students' games and things like that. And then I was sort of I did my exams. Like you have to sit another set of exams to become a medical doctor. So I was sitting them and revising for them. And I failed that exam. And then I was like, I don't really know what I'm going to do with my future. You have to specialise so young. And I was like, I'm going to be a renal doctor. And my wife was like, no, you're not. Like, you don't do anything towards that. Like, you're not doing any courses. You're not building your portfolio. Like, you work towards sports medicine. You spend all your time doing courses for sports medicine. You look into sports medicine. You read sports medicine journals. She was like, do sports medicine as a career. I was like, oh, yeah. I never realised that. Like, yeah, of course I could do that. So that was sort of how I fell into it. Yeah. So... yeah, it's all down to her, and that's why I'm here.
Brilliant. And coming back to I guess that I think you said about the impact side. What is it specifically about sports medicine? Because when you watch, and I watch enough of these medical programs, like A&E type ones, where if you're an A&E nurse, you just love certain aspects of that really gory stuff. Is there something in particular about the sports side that interested you?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one actually, because it covers such a range of topics. There's a lot of musculoskeletal medicine, that you would get anyway. So all of the tendon injuries and so on. So that's really interesting. It's also, when you work as a club doctor, you've got an element of general practice. So you're looking after a population of players. It's a small population, but it's essentially, you are like a GP for those players. So any problem that they come to you with, you have to then treat. So, it could be anything. They could have a mental health problem. They could have a fungal infection in their foot. They could have like an ingrown toenail, and you're sort of there to treat all of that, which is really fun because there's such a wide variety of things. But it's also, you're working with a population of people, like players that are motivated to do rehabilitation from their injuries, and they're motivated to be better. So you have that population of people that have that motivation to do what you say to get better, who will, a lot of the time you're trying to stop them doing too much to, from their injuries so that they can come back stronger. So it's very much like a motivated population, which I think is really nice. And you get an element of the gory stuff when you're doing pitch side medicine. So you get like the pre-hospital care, which is, when you run onto the pitch and you're relocating a finger, or you're assessing someone's fractured ankle and having to splint it. So you get that. And you also get, if you're a club doctor that works with academy level, you're doing a bit of pediatrics. So you end up doing, this pediatric care as well as like adult care. So there is a lot of variety. And I think it just keeps me interested. Like I like to be kept interested and have new things to do, but you're also able to, see the medical developments, and some team doctors that you work with. So my wife and I have both worked with the lead physician for the Patriots when we were on our electives, so over in Boston. And the role of that physician is to look at training aids and look at things like, there's a new helmet design. How's that going to affect us, like medically? Is it going to be beneficial? Is it going to improve the performance? And it encompasses all of that, and it just keeps me interested. It's really good fun.
No, it is good, and I think I'm right in saying that the whole head trauma studies that came out was because of the American football. Is that correct? And does that then lent over to football?
Yeah, so it is very much a lot of the information that we have is from American football. There's a increased awareness of head trauma now, increased awareness of concussion, and lots more studies around it. And the guidelines that we have were originally developed through like the work with American football, but now rugby are very, very good with their head injury assessments and head injury treatments and management, and that's really good. I think football is they're not quite as they're not quite as on it as they are in rugby. So like we were talking before about this, but like rugby has the ability to remove a player from play for a 15-minute head injury assessment, whereas football, you can't do that. And so I think that would be quite a useful thing to implement. They have made some changes. So they were aware, they were doing studies that if you were going up for a header and people were lifting their arms up to sort of push their elbows back to get more force on their header, and that was causing an increased incidence in concussion because people were being hit by elbows in the air. And so that then became a rule change that was implemented that then has been shown to reduce the number of concussions per game, per season. So they are aware of it, and they're putting in place things that will benefit the players and make it a safer game to play. But I think, being able to assess someone and then have them go back on and clear them is probably the next step. But it just depends on whether or not that will cause problems with the game and the laws of the game, I suppose. And I think that's a bit beyond me. So
well, it's interesting again because one of the things we always see is the rolling around. I think when there's ever these kind of rule changes, there are teams, managers that then try to use that as a way to to manipulate the game, kill time. If we're coming back to rugby, as you was kind of talking about there, where the game can carry on when a physio comes onto the pitch and they play around. I know football's a different game, but do you think something like that might happen in football?
I'd love to see it tried, I think, because there are instances where you're waiting on the sideline as a physio or a doctor trying to go onto the pitch, but you have to be called on by the referee. And I think that's the benefit of being a club doctor or a club physio. You know your players very well, and so when someone is milking it a bit and playing the game, because they're playing the game. That's what they can do. And if you're playing the game, and that player is playing the game and they're down because they know that they might get an advantage from it, that's that player and that's the case, and you're not particularly worried. Whereas when that you have a player who would normally just stand straight up, you think, I need to go on and assess this person, but you're not being called on. It can be a little bit frustrating. And I think that having the ability for the physio to run on and do that assessment may well cut down the amount of added time that you're getting on, like added on to the ends of games, which would be really beneficial. And I think it'd be a good move. It'd be interesting to see how they would implement it, I think.
Yeah. And how, as you said there, like within going back to the rugby league, when that physio runs onto the pitch, when does the club doctor step in as opposed to a physio running on?
Great question. So I think it really depends on the situation. So for me, if you saw a head trauma and the player goes down, you would be straight on. There's no question there. Like the doctor will come on, the physio will go on straight away, but the doctor will be following with the trauma kit. If there's an off the ball collapse, so a player nowhere near play drops to the floor, that's a sign that something serious is happening, and you should be straight on. I guess, like it just depends on your judgment, I suppose. And it's interesting because you see more junior doctors that are entering the field of play more regularly, whereas doctors with a bit more experience will often stand back and reassess from the sideline unless they know that it's a serious situation that they need to be called on for. So I think that's partly the answer. It just depends on your clinical judgment for it. The other one is if your player's down and the physio's on and they're not getting up, or the physio runs on and goes into like manual inline stabilization on mills, and they've got their hands either side of the player's head, that you should probably be going on to help with that assessment. So but there is a lot of judgment, a clinical judgment call. So if you think it's serious, you'd be straight on.
And as the club doctor at Colchester United, who do you look after? Do you just look after the home team?
So lower leagues, Colchester United been in League Two. Below the Championship, the club doctor will look after the home games for the team. So you look after the team on the home games, but a club in League One or League Two usually won't bring their own doctor to their away games. So you're responsible for the medical care of the players on the other team as well. Okay. During the match, and then the guideline is that you visit the other team's dressing room at the end of the game as well to see if there are any problems or delayed presentations or things that you need to manage. So it's really useful to have a meeting, usually at the start of the game, where you would meet with the other team's physios. You'd run over your emergency action plan to make sure that everyone's aware of at-risk players and how many medical staff there are, who's on the stretcher team, where the emergency exits are, and how long the ambulance journey is to certain hospitals, where if you need major trauma, maxillofacial, so if there's a facial injury, or any of those, you want to make sure that you've got all of that laid out, so that when in the worst case scenario something does happen and a player collapses on the pitch and needs resuscitating, you know that the ambulance is going to be here in 5 minutes and it's going to take 8 minutes to get them to the hospital, and in that time you need to have done all these other bits and got them off the pitch, and so you're aware of everyone knowing their role. So you become responsible for that team's medical care as well as your own team's medical care, and that's lower leagues. If you're Championship and above, your doctor will normally be going to your away games as well, and so they are then responsible for that. But you work together as a team anyway, like a big medical team. It was the same in rugby. So rugby league, I worked with Sheffield Eagles, are a championship club. So you would work with other championship clubs. Super League, their doctor would go to home and away games. Championship, you had one doctor per game, and you were responsible for the medical care of the home and away team. So and then the same with women's football. It's very much you're responsible for both teams on match day. So that brings with it its own unique challenges. If you're removing players from play that are on the other team, because they medically need to come off, that can cause some upset. But if you're doing the right thing medically, like, it's never wrong.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so when you meet with the opposition physio before a game, then do they kind of have to tell you any potential injuries, or is it up to them what they say?
It is essentially up to them to inform us of what is going on with their team, but ultimately, they would rather let us know if there's someone that they're worried about, because if that player, for instance, did go down injured, they'd want you to come on and help. So it's good to know. And so I mean, like, they'll normally tell at-risk players, so players who have like cardiac problems, so heart problems, that have been recognised through heart screening or assessment. So you would have them so that that if they collapse on the pitch, everyone's on, ready to resuscitate them. And then you have players that have sort of allergies, so peanut allergy and anaphylaxis, asthma, so another serious one. If you have a very severe asthma attack on the pitch, they'll be wanting assistance with that. So it's up to them to let you know, but it's also in their best interest to tell you.
Okay, I was just trying to think, like, and again, I'm thinking here if I was the opposition football manager and I knew that the opponent's star striker's got a bit of a knee injury or something, would you be going to tell your defenders, give him a little dig? Just give him a knock. He's got an injury there. Just give him a little dig.
I'm sure that has happened. I wouldn't, just because ethically that's not correct. And also, coming from their medical background is, whilst it's being shared with you, you're still a medical professional. So you have to treat it as such, that it's a medical issue. And so, it's not.
It's not the thing
not
to
be
do.
used for an advantage. No, I mean, if the coach has recognised that from previous games and things, then they may well tell the players. But I'm not party to that information. So
I know you wouldn't be. I just know that what happens in football, I mean, maybe this is just more my Sunday league background than the professional in me. That's fair enough. And in terms of the most common injuries that you see, not just in professional, but just in football, I guess in general, I mean, interesting, I guess, for a listener, if there's something that's reoccurring, what's the best way what's the most common injury and how do you get around it?
So, yes, I mean, we're seeing a lot of, in the news and in the media, you're seeing a lot of ACL injuries coming up, especially in the women's game. And it was a really big problem a few years ago when you remember the Blade football boots, Adidas Blades.
Oh yes,
yeah. So I think they did a study with them that showed that with those footballs, because with the boots they gave you much more grip, but when you tried to rotate on it, it got stuck in the turf, and so you ended up having more ACL injuries. So that's, it's still common that you would see an ACL injury. Ligaments sprains and strains and tears in the knee are quite common. So we have ligament structures throughout the knee, but down the sides and through the knee to support it and give it stability.
Yeah.
And, as with any ball sport really, where you're having change in direction, and acceleration and deceleration, you're getting contact, you're having tackles coming in, you're taking force through that leg, you're going to see ligament injury. So that's probably one of the most common ones.
Yeah.
Head injury's gone down. It's not common, but it's not uncommon. But I think that what you're seeing a lot more of is probably recurrent head trauma, like a subclinical trauma, or subclinical, I suppose, like just through constant heading of the ball and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's presenting much later.
It's
hard to say that that's coming through. I'd say probably like knee ligament injuries would be the most common ones that you're seeing. And like I say, like recently there's been a lot of that through women's football.
We know that physical injuries are much easier to spot than sort of mental well-being. And how does the club doctor come in there, and how easy is it to sort of diagnose those kind of issues?
Mental health's such a big thing, and actually I think it's a tricky one to manage. So we have a club psychologist who the players can speak to, and especially the academy players can speak to the club psychologist. It's making the players aware that you are available for them to speak to. Ultimately, I'm there for their medical care, so that's mental health and physical health. And so if they want to disclose something to me, and they don't give me consent to share that, that's absolutely fine. But I'm there to help them for both mental and physical health.
With your role as well, do you just cover the first team? Because I'd imagine as a from a football fan's point of view, probably the toughest time from a mental health point of view is a player that's released, a youth player. Do you get involved at that level, or is that someone else's job at the club?
So again, that's a really interesting question. It really depends on the club that you're at. The higher league clubs, so Championship, Premiership, have large medical departments, and so they might have a doctor just for the academy. They might have several doctors for the academy. Right. It really depends on their budget. And so with Colchester, I cover the academy as well. So I'm not as involved with it unless they want to speak to me. The psychologist that works with the academy is, and if we have a player that is dropped, Colchester's academy is a great academy, and they do a lot of life skills and really look after their players, and you can see that with the level of their academy being a Cat 2 academy, so they're playing with teams that Premiership and Championship, so much like similar levels of academy, and it's something they do really well. I think that there's probably an element of that, and I think that actually if you've had a lad who's been told that he's going to be the next Premier League superstar from age 6, and he's gone up to 17, and suddenly they've said, no, like you're probably off 16, you're not going to make it, like you're not ready for us, and then they let you go. I think that can have a devastating mental health effect on you. It just depends on how you frame it as well, I suppose, because then you see some players that they have been dropped by an academy, like a very good academy. They've then been picked up by another academy, and then they've gone on to become that Championship Premier League superstar.
Well, Declan Rice is a good example of that.
Absolutely. He was dropped from Chelsea, and then he went to West Ham.
That's it.
Yeah. So.
And then Arsenal, but we won't talk about the Arsenal part. We trained him at West Ham. Okay, great stuff. And when, at what point, Like we know that there's players that just want to play, and if they get an injury, at what point do you sign them off so they are back ready to play? How does that work?
So it really, again, it depends on the injury, and it depends on their age, and it depends on where we're at with them. So I suppose looking at it from a head injury point of view, so we'll do that. We'll do some musculoskeletal bits, but a head injury point of view, you have a return to play protocol. So someone who's had a concussion, they have to have their rest initially, get them to be symptom free, and then build up their like introduction to sports. So they'll start with some light exercise, bit of walking, and then if they remain essentially symptom free, they might get some symptoms, but not like if they're getting a bit of a headache.
Yeah.
But it's sort of 2 out of 10 intensity rather than, if it was a 10 out of 10 intensity, we'd have to go back a step to when they were at rest.
Right.
But if they're able to manage that, they then progress in their, like what they're doing and their activity. And as long as they remain symptom free and they can progress through each different stage, they then get signed off and they're sent back. It's very much a education situation where you're having to educate the player and say, I know you want to get back.
Yeah.
But if you don't tell us the truth about your symptoms, you may go back too soon, which will have a detrimental effect. And so you end up, it's very much an education around that. If it's a sort of musculoskeletal injury, so let's say an ACL, again, there is like a protocol, and there are different protocols that you can follow, but it's getting them back to a level that they're at so they can go into full training. And then are they keeping up with full training? Are they managing sort of all the movements that they'll be expected to manage during a game?
Yeah.
What's their fitness like? Are they able to get back to playing? Do they need to have sort of come in for 10 minutes at the end of the game to get them back to a bit of gameplay, and then building up the time that they're able to play for. So it's you'd sign them back to like you have reviews at different stages of the protocol, and so you would sign them back to say, oh, this person is now back to, they're entering the graduated return to play, or they're entering this stage of training, or they are now able to go into full training. And then at the end of it, you're like, how you feeling? You can have a chat with them, you can reassess them, and then say, right, okay, you can go back to competition, but you'll be on limited minutes, and then see how you get on with that and build it up. So it's I mean, players want to play. Like that's what they,
of course,
they enjoy playing football. Like otherwise you wouldn't do it. So some of the time it is educating them and saying, this is what we need from you. Some of the time it's stopping them doing too much and saying, yes, you've done your rehabilitation, like you've done the program, and I appreciate that you feel like you could do more, but let's work through it so that we're able to get you back in a short period of time, rather than setting you back so that instead of it being 9 months that you're out, we're actually looking at a year and a half because we've done a bit too much and it's made things worse.
Yeah. And when you sign them back, do you sign them back to like the physio? Like, because I'm assuming from an everyday football fan, it's the physio first. If it's too bad, it goes to the club doctor. You then do some sort of assessment and send them back to the physio, or does it not work like that?
Not quite. So the model of your work should really be an integrated approach. So you should be working as a team with physiotherapy, medicine, sports science, strength and conditioning. So it's really important to have that open avenue of communication. We do it very well. Like they do it very well at Colchester. We did it very well. We've done it well at other clubs that I've worked at, and it's having that level of communication so that everyone can say, this is where we're at, this is what we're struggling with. Like, does anyone have any ideas as to what we can do to break through that sort of that boundary? Like, is there anything that we can do? So you should be working together as that, and then if someone has a problem and you're like, oh, I know the answer to that, like I can help you with that bit. A lot of the time it is knowing, there's going to be a bit where, for instance, if someone for an ACL surgery, and then there'll be a lot of wound checks and having a look at the surgery scar and being like, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like there's no infection there. Like that's fine. We can get you back to where do we need to be? Like how much can you bend that knee? And then from a physio point of view, like what do we need to do to progress that forward? And then, it's very much sort of overseeing role, but everyone works together and then communicates together about it. Because I think the problem comes when you have different departments working sort of separately against each other.
Yeah.
And if that's happening, it can have detrimental effects for the player and for the club. So
Yeah, fair enough. And obviously, you do rehabilitate people back. Have you ever had a situation where you've had to tell a player that he shouldn't play anymore?
Not really. I've had players that have had concussions in quick succession, or within a certain time period. And if you're getting sort of 2 concussions within a year, the rugby league guidance is that they then have to see a neurologist who specialises in concussion treatment, and then it's them sort of clearing them to go back to play. And we've had a couple of players that they've said, well, maybe you should be thinking about taking a bit of time away to really work out whether or not this is what you want to do. And I mean, it's a hard conversation to have with anyone, that saying,
Yeah.
the thing that you've spent your life doing might not be the best for you. And I know it's fine now, but 20, 30 years down the line, is this going to be what's best for you? And it's a hard conversation to have, but we have to break bad news in a non-football environment. So you kind of get used to breaking the news, but it's not a nice conversation.
No, it never is. I suppose, obviously, again, you're not just a club doctor, obviously you're a GP as well. So, I mean, can you ever get used to that news? I mean, you probably get used to the delivery part, but you must take that home with you.
Yeah, to an extent you do. But, it's about what you can do for someone rather than what you're telling them, that you telling them the bad news. It's like saying, this is the situation, but this is what we can offer you to make things like more comfortable, or this is what we can offer you to to really help. I mean, it is hard, but you can only do what you can do.
Yeah, I always think back to Dean Ashton, again, coming back from West Ham, but just England, and he was at the very top of his game. And I think, I don't know who it was who told him, but obviously then he might not be able to walk again or walk properly. And so at that point, you just kind of, you have to call it a day. But is that a club doctor's role to deliver that? Or do you think that would be like specialists? Or
I think it's very much in combination. So, so specialists will give their opinion on that to the player. You are there to sort of reinforce that and make sure that to repeat that message, because it's they're the experts. So they're the experts in what they've seen previously. Far be it from me to say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. So they're the experts, and so they might deliver it, but it's for you to make sure that it's understood. Like they might have listened, but they might not have heard. So you have to make sure that that's the message is understood, really.
Yeah,
but you're also the one that they're going to come to after they've seen the specialist and say, this is what I've been told. What do you think? And what's what do we do? Like where do we go from here? And they're not going to go back to the specialist and say that. So you are, it's then your role to sort of take that on and move forward with it.
And this is a question really not just for professional sports, but I think any Sunday league player, Saturday league player, in terms of the warm up and the stretching, because the variety of different kind of warm ups and very basic level of stretching. How important is that stretching part before and afterwards?
Afterwards, super important.
Yeah.
Definitely. You should be warming up because you need to prepare yourself for what you're going to do. And if you're not training regularly, or as regularly as a professional sports team might be, then like the warm up is really important, because if you go from, being cold to your winger starting to run down the wing as fast as you can after that ball, there's going to be some degree of injury at some point. So stretching, definitely. Active rather than passive is probably better. So making sure that you're warming up, keeping active, but not overstretching. And then at the end, the cool down is probably more important, just so that your recovery your recovery is quicker. But yeah, definitely is important.
So it's interesting because I think, again, like lots of people warm up beforehand. Again, we do see professional clubs doing that, but I think in most, say, everyday sports players, which is the majority of us, to be fair, that cool down period just doesn't really happen. There's always a warm up beforehand, but we don't really do anything after.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. I'll go in and think, oh yeah, like probably don't need to warm up. I can just turn up, do my class, and then at the end of it, I'm like, yeah, cool, right, go now, and then leave. The days that I stretch afterwards, I definitely notice the difference the next day. And you think, oh, like this stretching thing really works. So, yeah, I'd definitely encourage it.
That's always like you do something, you don't bother warming down. The next day you're fine. The day after you can't walk.
Yeah,
is that the kind of thing?
Delayed onset muscle soreness is a real thing.
Yeah.
It's the moment when you get out of bed and you think, oh, not really sure I can face walking down those stairs today.
Yeah, I've had that enough times. I guess the last couple of questions. In terms of the hardest injuries to treat, what do they look like in football?
It's a really good question. It's really thrown me, that one. So I think in terms of like hardest injury to treat are probably the ones that are going to take someone out of playing for a while. Things like plantar fasciitis, where it's an irritating problem and it's really painful, but the only treatment for it, I mean, you can have a steroid injection. It's not 100% that it'll work. And what you need to do is do a lot of rehabilitation, stretching, and rest, because if you are too active on it, it flares up and you're back to stage one. So I think that is probably some of the hardest stuff. And patella tendonitis as well. If you don't rehabilitate it and you don't, you're not stretching it, you're not taking your anti-inflammatories and resting for the appropriate period of time, and then you try and go back to activity too soon, it just flares up again and it's always there. Right. So I think they're quite hard. Osteochondral defects. So it sounds fancy, but what it is in a joint, so in your knee, where your knee sits together and you've got the two bones pushing together in the knee joint with the patella sitting in front. In between those bones, you have cartilage, so a nice smooth surface to make sure there's no friction really, and you can just sort of move your knee nice and smoothly. As we get older, so I'm finding at the moment, going upstairs where your knees creak and you're getting a bit of crackling in your knees, and that's called crepitus, and that's where the bones are rubbing together a little bit. But an osteochondral defect is where that cartilage has a little hole in it, so it's effectively like bone rubbing on bone.
Right. Yeah.
those can flare up as well, and you end up with pain within the knee and some swelling around the knee, and then you can rehabilitate that. You can, reduce your load. You can improve the strength around the knee. But if it flares up again, it's then very painful, and then it means you have to go back to doing the rehabilitation, and it's normally through like increased load. So I think the ones that just sort of niggle are going to be the ones that are the hardest to manage, because you'll get to the point where you feel like you can go back and you can do everything that you want to do, and then it just pops back up, and it's like, I'm back. So and then it comes back, and then you're like, oh, I've now got to sort of rehabilitate that again. So that's, I mean, they're the ones that are more challenging, because you a lot of the time you can't sort of see it as such. You see a player get taken out and they tear an ACL, or you see a player get taken out and they break a leg, and you think, oh, that's really bad. But actually the treatment for it is mend the bone, surgery for the ligament maybe, and then once that's fixed, rehabilitate it, and you'll come back and you'll be back playing. But it's those niggling ones that are probably the worst.
The ones that don't go away.
And
you mentioned earlier obviously about the experience, and for more experienced doctors when to come in and take certain actions. But how big a role does technology play these days?
So in the higher leagues, it's actually really, really good. So sort of, especially in rugby, Super League rugby, Premiership rugby union, it's really useful. You have 12 camera angles. I think World Cup rugby, you can have in excess of 20 camera angles on a match, and you can see things. So you see someone take a head knock, but you can see in slow motion, you can rewind, you can have a look, you can see that they maybe didn't protect themselves as they fell. So you think, right, well, they're concussed, like they're coming off. So yes, that's really, really useful, because if you're watching it from pitch side and you're having to make that judgment, there's going to be things that you miss. You can't replay it. So, that's really, really useful. We do a lot of, there's a lot of monitoring how far players are running. So using GPS to work out how far they're running. And that's really useful in terms of working out what their load is. So yes, technology is really good. And, it'd be very useful to have more of it. I guess the other thing is if you have more technology, you need to have the people to review it. So if there's a single doctor at a game and they're like, oh, we need to go back and watch the playback and so on, like either the game has to stop for you to watch the playback, or your eyes off the game to watch the playback, and you might miss something else that's going on. So you need to have the people that can watch it. And like I said, the higher leagues have that role, and you have people, I think Major League Soccer in America has a medical spotter role, and that's literally someone there watching the game, getting the playback, watching the playback, and seeing whether or not there was a head injury, or whether or not there is an injury should that player be coming off. So so I think that's really useful. The other benefit, and it's a really minor thing in terms of technology, but it's having a radio and having communication with your physiotherapist, or being able to say to them, like, is everything okay? Do you need me to come out? And at the lower leagues and lower levels, you don't have, or you might not have a radio. So, you don't have that, like that link, which can make it a little bit more tricky. And then at that point, if your physio is running on and they're like, I really need some support, like you're like, yep, cool, like I've got it. Whereas if they're down and they're having to just shout across the pitch to you, it's it can be a bit of a challenge. So I think just simple things, radio, video playback, really important.
Fair enough. And if people wanted to follow you, find out more about you, how would they do that?
So my main thing is on Instagram. I'm actually on as Stubbings. Long story, but I got a letter addressed to that when I was younger.
Right.
So that's how that happened. And I post from there. I mean, I do, it's a bit of everything really. I've been putting a lot of Spot the Doc on there, which is essentially photos from football or rugby that I'm in, but the doctor's never the focus of the attention. So, you have to try and find me in the background of these photos. I might turn it into its own Instagram, to be fair. Set up a Spot the Doc Instagram and go from there. But yeah, so Instagram's my main one, and I'm on LinkedIn if you're looking in terms of professionally and wanted to get in touch about anything. I'm happy to chat about medical roles and so on, and also happy to help with people that are coming up and want to get involved in sports medicine or general practice and sports medicine. Happy to help people out on that way.
Fantastic, Nick. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on and being an unsung hero of sports. That's what the show is all about. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Bye.